For several months, well-known figures have been trying to warn the public about what is happening behind the scenes in the United States. One example is Nic Carter, who discussed this issue during his appearance on the CoinTelegraph podcast. It's reported that the US regulator has launched a large-scale operation to heavily restrict the crypto industry. This operation even has a name, Operation Chokepoint 2.0. In this video, everything is explained: the weapons used in this conflict, the motivations behind it, and why the entire operation is illegal and unconstitutional. Let's start with the facts. The US regulator has been looking unfavorably at the crypto ecosystem for some time now. US financial authorities, including the Federal Reserve and the Office of the Controller of the Currency, or OCC, which regulates US banks, have always been extremely critical of this new ecosystem, at least until today. They have consistently advised US banks against dealing with clients involved in any way with digital assets, especially if there's any connection to decentralized finance, or DeFi, the famous decentralized financial system. US banks are making life difficult for crypto companies. It's become increasingly challenging for these companies to access banking services, as banks systematically refuse them as clients. How can you develop a business around cryptocurrencies if you don't have access to the traditional banking system? In short, if you're a US-based company involved in cryptocurrencies in any way, your life becomes unbearable. This video, published exactly a year ago, already feels distant. At that time, the United States seemed to be gradually positioning itself as the leader in the sector, just as they successfully did with the internet and later with social networks. In early 2022, Joe Biden signed a presidential decree on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. For Michael Saylor, the famous CEO of MicroStrategy, the US president had officially legitimized the existence of this new industry. The decree urged the US government to quickly establish a clear and concise regulatory framework to protect individuals while allowing room for innovation and ecosystem development. The message was clear: become global leaders in this field. During Bitcoin Miami 2022, Republican Senator Cynthia Lummis explained that there had been a real change in the mindset within the political class. A number of US representatives, both Democrats and Republicans, have fulfilled their duty and are beginning to understand these new technologies. We had seen, for example, Janet Yellen, who is known to be rather anti-crypto, stating that these new tools would play a key role in the banking and financial world. In short, the US seemed to be moving fast and strong. The contrast with Europe and the endless debates around MiCA was striking. Once again, everything would suggest that the US would innovate, Europe would regulate, and China would copy. Well, perhaps not anymore. More and more industry giants, like Coinbase, for example, are sounding the alarm. 1 million tech jobs are at risk of going overseas as the US goes down a path of regulatory uncertainty. The EU, UK, UAE, Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, and Japan are all creating environments for crypto to flourish so that they can capitalize on the next wave of innovation. That's what the official Coinbase account tweeted just a few weeks ago. And Brian Armstrong, the CEO, hammered the point home just a few days ago, confirming that Coinbase was indeed considering leaving the US if the situation did not change. Another extremely troubling fact is the forced closure of Signature Bank a few weeks ago during the banking panic that followed the fall of SVB. Signature Bank was openly pro-crypto and managed around $16 billion in digital assets for its clients. But in December 2022, the bank was forced to halve its crypto assets. The official reason was to reduce risk and better diversify the nature of its clients. It wasn't enough. In early March 2023, just days after the collapse of SVB, Signature Bank was forced by the New York banking regulator to cease its operations. While facing difficulties like the majority of banks due to numerous customer withdrawals, amid concerns about having their funds locked, Signature Bank was not insolvent at the time of its forced closure. Signature Bank had $100 billion in assets to cover the $88 billion belonging to its clients. Therefore, Signature Bank faced a liquidity crisis while remaining solvent. According to Barney Frank, former member of Congress and member of the bank's board of directors, regulators wanted to send a very strong anti-crypto message. The bank was forced to close because it had many relationships with significant players in this new ecosystem. Brian Brooks, CEO of Binance US and former controller at the OCC, the regulatory body for the US banks, shares the same opinion. The liquidity crisis in certain banks was used as an excuse to further isolate the crypto ecosystem from traditional finance. Of course, the US government denies everything. The closure of Signature Bank had absolutely nothing to do with the activity of its clients, but was in fact caused by significant insolvency risk due to the assets held by the institution. However, alongside that, the FDIC still demanded that the entity entity acquiring Signature Bank show all crypto clients to the door. It can't get much clearer than that. Well, we still need to try to be as objective as possible in this. It's possible that Signature Bank didn't have sufficient internal processes to handle crypto. Signature Bank is currently facing legal action in the FTX case. According to our information, bank officials were alleged to have exhibited gross negligence in their relationship with Sam Bankman-Fried and his team. As always, it's relatively difficult to distinguish fact from fiction in this whole story. However, it's true that it wouldn't be the first time the US government attempted to suffocate an industry by completely isolating it from the banking sector. Starting in 2013, the US Department of Justice, for example, initiated an investigation known as Operation Choke Point. Actors in around 30 industries, such as pawn shops, firework vendors, firearm sellers, online casino, and poker sites, reportedly face stigmatization for several years, with their bank accounts being closed one after another without any explanation. Through a series of documents and reports sent to banks, the message from the government at the time was clear: we dislike these industries and you better stop doing business with them to avoid problems. However, what needs to be understood is that there is no specific law that authorizes this kind of practice. In the US, the sale of firearms or online poker is perfectly legal, as long as it is done properly, meaning in compliance with the applicable rules. After several months of investigation by the US Department of Justice and hearings by the Senate, several banks were convicted, and the FDIC issued a report to financial institutions encouraging banks to adopt a risk-based approach on a client-by-client basis, rather than refusing to provide banking services to all actors in an industry. A few years later, history seems to be repeating itself with the crypto industry, with Operation Choke Point 2.0. The same modus operandi is being followed on actors within an industry that doesn't violate any laws and complies with the current regulations, yet they're being denied basic banking services. Similar to Operation Choke Point 1.0, everything relies on a number of reports written by government entities describing the systemic risks in the crypto industry, and subtly encouraging US banks to avoid doing business with this new ecosystem. Just a few days ago, the US Treasury released a report, Illicit Finance Risk Assessment of Decentralized Finance. This report discusses views on strengthening existing control and regulatory policies in the face of risks posed by DeFi. In this report, only risks are mentioned without ever discussing the potential of the technology and these new tools. There's no nuance. The evaluation of the risk-benefit balance and eventually deciding if it's worth it should always be done objectively. There is no objectivity on this subject here. It's a real attack. The authors list, non-exhaustively, criminal actors who use DeFi, including rogue and authoritarian states such as North Korea. While the moral judgment against these actors or morally reprehensible activities are not being questioned, it's unfortunate that the document gives the impression of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The report presents recommendations that seem commendable in theory, such as strengthening tools to combat money laundering and counter-financing terrorism, CTF. However, it completely misses the point of disintermediation and the fact that the future of finance will likely rely on autonomous protocols operating on decentralized networks. Yesterday's regulations will not work on tomorrow's technologies. As it's often said, trying to regulate automobiles like horses will not achieve your objectives. The other recent damning report is the Economic Report of the President. It's a document written by the Council of Economic Advisors for the US Congress. While it doesn't only discuss crypto, around 10% of the 500-page report is allocated to demolishing this new industry. Bitcoin is bad for the environment, is mentioned without ever acknowledging renewable energy or the use of excess electricity capacity. The stablecoin Luna collapsed, which means all stablecoins are dangerous. Then we move on to discuss the risks faced by crypto investors. And then there's the fact that DeFi poses significant risks to the economic stability of the United States and internationally. In conclusion, as we mentioned from the beginning of the video, we are far, and I mean very far, from what Biden promised a year ago. The US government and the banking sector seem terrified by the rise of cryptocurrencies and are determined to slow down the movement. Senator Pat Toomey revealed last August that a whistleblower had informed him about strong pressure from the FDIC. The agency reportedly instructed its regional branches to send letters to banks discouraging them from doing business with crypto-related companies. Within banks, compliance officers and others responsible for regulatory compliance understand the message loud and clear. Stay away from crypto activities if you want to continue to exist. To put even more pressure on them, it seems that regulators are threatening dissenting banks with endless audits to suffocate. To put even more pressure on them, It seems that regulators are threatening dissenting banks with endless audits to suffocate them, as revealed by the law firm Cooper & Kirk. For banks, the choice is clear. They stop their activities with crypto-related clients. Operation Choke Point 2.0 is thus a roundabout way of waging war against the crypto industry without going through Congress. Once again, according to the law firm Cooper & Kirk, U.S. regulators are de facto implementing a policy that deems the crypto industry too risky to be banked. The government is thus exercising legislative power rather than executive power. In essence, it's deciding the law instead of merely applying it. In fact, it's a violation of the fundamental principles of democracy, such as the separation of powers between the executive and legislative branches. Is it really surprising though? The system is sick, and people are starting to realize it. This graph should alert you. It shows that deposits in commercial banks are decreasing at the same time that deposits in the central bank are increasing. This is called a bank run 2.0, without queues in front of the banks since everyone is at their computers. And it's completely logical. The bank's job is to transform short-term deposits into long-term loans with higher interest rates. If short-term rates are higher than long-term rates, as is the case today, then you put your money in the central bank. It's better rewarded and less risky. Banks are trying to save themselves and maintain the status quo by exerting pressure on the political apparatus. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies emerge as an alternative. It's a parallel financial world that's much more transparent and where everything is yet to be built. This, in my opinion, bothers a lot of people. The entire Operation Choke Point 2.0 fits perfectly with what we've been describing on GA Crypto for several months. We're heading towards very strict capital controls, and it's not fiction. It was witnessed during the CleanSat mining fundraising a few weeks ago. 1/3 of the investors who participated in the operation faced significant difficulties in withdrawing 100,000 euros from their French bank accounts. From threats of account closure, freezing funds without reason, abusive requests for documentation, to exorbitant processing times. I assure you it was surreal and terrifying at the same time. The establishment is systematically dismantling the bridges between the old and the new world to prevent capital flight. Our hope in all of this is the regionalization of globalization. It's highly unlikely that all countries will align themselves with such policies, as some jurisdictions will simply have more to gain than to lose by allowing the crypto ecosystem to flourish within their borders. It's classical game theory. Switzerland, as well as Hong Kong, United Kingdom, and even Europe, could in fact take advantage of this situation to attract American companies to their jurisdictions. I'm a bit skeptical about Europe because it seems that the continent has an incredible ability to self-sabotage, and its economic situation is still extremely precarious. At GA and GA Crypto, we keep the bare minimum in the banking system. Our assets are intangible assets, shares of companies, or cryptocurrencies. We only keep at the bank the money that we're willing to lose. Our goal is to support anyone who wants to do the same to the best of our ability. I would like to end this video with a quote from Bastiat. Thus, a people who do not know how to limit the sphere of action of the state will sooner or later find themselves in subjugation. Control over money and financial services is the dream of any authoritarian government, and that's the direction we're headed in, all for the supposed benefit of citizens, of course. Financial and economic stability, fighting money laundering and terrorism financing, and combating climate change. The subjects are plentiful for gradually implementing increasingly oppressive financial measures. But what's left when it comes to freedom of speech, freedom of choice, freedom of movement, and ultimately, what remains of democracy when you are no longer in control of your money? One of the most well-known examples is, of course, the case of WikiLeaks in 2010, completely financially suffocated. All payment processors were forbidden from transacting with the Julian Assange-led movement. However, one channel did remain open, regardless of different opinions. There's an orange light at the end of the tunnel. Let's continue moving towards it and hope it's not the headlights of a truck.